Hey, HopeQuest family, Troy and Melissa here, and we're grateful to be with you. We are back in our living room. It's not cold,
so
there's no nice fire. So sorry, sweetheart. I know how much you love a fire. And today, we're so grateful that you joined us because last week we talked about the journey fast. And remind folks what you're fasting from real quick.
So I'm fasting from any technology escapes.
Okay, technology escapes.
Word games, looking at cabins, decorating houses in my mind, or Pinterest, all of this stuff.
Okay. So today we're going to follow up on that because Melissa is struggling, and Melissa doesn't struggle very often. So we have to seize upon these opportunities. But you made a confession to me the other day, and for starters, it encouraged me to know that you struggle, and I don't want you to struggle, and I don't rejoice in your struggles, but it encourages me to know that
I'm human.
That you're human, absolutely. So today we're going to talk about temptation in relationship, because Melissa made a confession to me the other night. We had spent the day, went to church. Saw a very, very good friend of ours, Ray, get baptized.
It was awesome.
It was incredible just to see what God's done in his life and his marriage and his family. And then we were hanging out with some good friends at lunch, and they were talking about they're building a new cabin in the mountains, or a new home in the mountains. And describe the story to us. What were they sharing, and what was happening in your heart?
So they were talking about this beautiful lot they found that's got an amazing view that can help them draw closer to God. They were talking about creating their own house plans just the way they wanted it. And so
furniture, decorations.
Yeah, the whole, the design of the house, all that stuff. So, immediately what started happening in me was envy. Okay. I want that. And then also just the place that I can go in my head when I'm stressed, right, or wanting to check out or have some sense of control, is this whole idea of thinking about if I could have the perfect house, if it would be this, that. So, it just kind of started that longing, hunger in me. And so, before the fast, I would come home and it would energize me to look at cabins, what real estate's available, or is there a good lot we could build on?
How you might decorate
that,
exactly. all that sort of stuff that they're talking to you about.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what happened, we're sitting here in our living room, just talking, just kind of debriefing the day and talking about things, and Melissa had her computer out, and she looked over at me and she said, I am really feeling tempted right now. And I'm like, what are you talking about, sweetie? And she said, I'm really feeling tempted to look at cabins right now. And cabin looking was one of the specific things that you're fasting from. So tell me, what was going on in your heart at that moment when you shared with me this really significant temptation you were facing?
Well, I think just wanting to get it out there, not to be alone with it. It's kind of a humorous thing we talk about, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge sin, or it's not a horrible thing to look at cabins. But in my life, instead of being relational with God or you, it's easier just to escape that way.
Right.
A place where our fantasy lives are a place where we have control.
Yes.
Right, and there's a sense of control, and I can contain this world. So it can be really addictive.
Yes.
And so, just to share it with you, to not deal with that alone, knowing you would understand based on our conversation earlier that day. And, for me, just acknowledging it to myself, this is a thing, right? This is a thing that I really want to do right now, even though I've committed to a group of women that are joining with me in their fast. So, I don't want to let them down in partnering with them, and I don't want to let myself down in my commitment.
And yet the struggle was real.
The struggle was real.
Well, and here's the thing that I think is important to note here. This particular temptation wasn't a temptation to sin greatly. And in fact, one could argue that looking at cabins on the internet is not sinful at all. But this falls into that category of stuff where God deals with our hearts about things that you and I do, that we do, that are coping strategies that again may not be overtly sinful or even sinful at all, but the way we use them causes us to depend upon ourselves rather than God, or to isolate and kind of manage our own fears or exhaustion or other difficult emotions. And so, Melissa, talk about for just a second the reality that, and we'll get to this here in a moment, but there was a legitimate desire going on in your heart in the evenings when you would look at cabins. There was something going on in you. To talk about that real quick so folks can understand this struggle that you're having now Sunday night to not look at cabins.
Well, so, all of us have legitimate desires,
Yes.
needs, longings, and they're very often connected to areas of absence, neglect, and not having enough, inadequacy in our lives. So on the days when I'm really tired or really stressed, and really I want rest, a sense of oasis or comfort, a place to unplug, and that's when, the temptation to do word puzzles and get into a cognitive part in my brain, or to look at cabins where, it's perfect over there. no drama free.
You can just escape into
Exactly.
that world.
Right, I could just sit and be. And so, underlying often is a real need for comfort, rest,
Maybe even connection.
peace, serenity. Yeah, some kind of connection. Or beauty, something that just stills my soul, all is well. And so recognizing, we'll talk more about this later, but recognizing kind of the underlying need, longing, desire, place of need or want is important.
Yeah, and for me right now, I'm fasting from unhealthy foods, which is a pretty significant portion of my diet.
Let's be real.
I'm not a big broccoli Brussels sprout fan. I'm just not. So for me, I had that same struggle. I'm overwhelmed. I want a little bit of space. I want a little bit of peace. And there's this thing, when I think about like Cheeseburger Bobby's, I can go to Cheeseburger Bobby's, and that cheeseburger, the double cheeseburger with extra fries, just brings this sense of comfort and control and peace. It's temporary, it's destructive to my body, but that temptation and that struggle is real. So what we wanted to talk about for a few minutes that we have together today is how do we deal, because here's the thing, temptation's going to come into your life. Temptation's not sin. Temptation is never sin. And temptation is going to come. So in relationships in particular, whether that's a marriage, a husband-wife relationship, or other close relationships, how do we deal with temptation in relationships, especially when that temptation is going to have an impact on the relationship, maybe because of past history, because of other struggles, or even the commitment that you've openly shared in that relationship. You've got your ladies that you've committed to. You're in relationship with those ladies. You've made a commitment to them to join in this fast. So how do we deal with temptation in relationship? And so we want to give you some real practical tools. And the first tool is this: talk about the temptation together. Melissa kind of did that. And was that hard or easy to talk about it?
I mean, it's a low stakes. It's not threatening to
That's
you
true.
that I look at cabins. So it was easy to out that. Like, you get me, you understand.
And when I sneak off to Taco Bell or Cheeseburger Bobby's, it's a little bit harder to talk about because there's higher stakes there, and it feels like that temptation is something. So I get that, but the bottom line is we should talk about it and just get it out in the light. And temptation 101, if we get temptation out in the light, it loses its power.
Right.
But also, in addition to losing its power, talking about temptation together actually breeds connection. I felt closer to you. I felt trusted by you. I felt respect for you. And how did it feel for you to be able to share that with me? You shared a little bit of a second ago, but again, how did it feel to talk about that with me?
It felt I wasn't so alone with that. Someone was supporting me in that, and in some way commiserating with me, or if not getting it fully, at least I know you understand. So I'm known in that, and that's ultimately what we're after, being known
Absolutely.
and knowing others,
Absolutely.
a relationship.
So, number one, talk about temptation together. Number two, and this is important in a relationship, especially a marriage relationship, and that is you've got to have other outlets to talk about your temptation, especially the higher stakes temptations, the temptations around maybe betrayal or hurt. You've got to have other outlets. That's why, for instance, your spouse shouldn't be your primary accountability partner when you're dealing with addiction recovery. You ought to have other places to be able to share that. And you've got some other places where you can share that. I have other places where I can share my temptations. So while we do need to talk about it together, we need to have other outlets so that we can deal with some of the higher stakes temptations and the more challenging temptations. So that's number two. So number one, talk about it together. Number two, have other outlets. Number three, and this is where I need you to help me unpack this because occasionally I struggle with number three here, and that is don't take your spouse's or your friend's temptation personally. So Melissa, talk to us about what we mean by don't take temptation personally.
So especially in high stakes relationships where it matters, our connection really matters and can even feel life or death. Right. The marriage, the life of the marriage or death of the marriage depends on this connection. It can feel as if in those moments, if the other person is sharing, hey, I was really tempted to do this, act out in some way, drink, drugs, look at porn. It can feel as though there is something wrong with me. It can trigger my own belief that somehow I'm inadequate.
Right.
Why am I not valuable enough for you to fight for? Why would you even be tempted by that? What's wrong with me that still has an appeal to you?
So if we could kind of unpack that to this current situation, you're sitting there and telling me, hey, I'm tempted to look at cabins. And I was a part of that conversation where we're listening to our friends, and it's exciting to think about getting property and building your dream cabin up in the mountains, et cetera, et cetera. But it would be easy for me to take that personally and think, oh crap, here goes Melissa again. She's complaining. She's not satisfied with the house that we have. She's not satisfied with the lifestyle that we have together as a couple. And all of a sudden now I'm making your temptation about me. And it's not about you. It's not about me at all.
Correct.
It's a battle going on internally, driven by your own desires and your own fears and your own need for control and rest. And so the thing we have to recognize in temptation with relationships, especially high-stakes relationships, is there's this temptation to take temptation, pardon the pun, personally. And the reality is someone else's temptation isn't because of me. It's not driven by me. I shouldn't take it personally. What we ought to do in relationships is lean in to that conversation and support one another. And when I sit there and think, oh no, Melissa's tempted because she's just dissatisfied with the home and the life that we have, now all of a sudden, how do you feel?
Well, then it's not safe to talk about anymore. Right. Then now I have to comfort you. I can't lean in for support. I have to somehow comfort or reassure you that this really isn't about you, or that I don't find you an inadequate provider.
Or our house is really okay.
Right, our house is really okay. So, this idea that we can get caught up in our fears get activated, right? Oh no, the person I love is tempted. The relationship is threatened, and it can feel really personal, even though it probably has nothing to do with us.
And if we can recognize that and not take it personally, now we can actually be there to support them and listen to them and be a partner, if you will, as they battle temptation. When I take it personally, like you said, it makes it unsafe. It makes it where you really can't trust me and you really can't share with me, and vice versa. So just recognize these three things in particular. Talk about it together, have other outlets, and don't take temptation personally are huge steps along the way of dealing with temptation in a relationship. There's one final one, but we don't have time to talk about it today, but let me just throw it out there. It is this: address the underlying desire, need, or fear that's behind the temptation. This is huge. This is where we see more couples get stuck. We see more recoveries get off track. It's It's where we get messed up. So we want to talk about this next week. And in the meantime, recognize that God gave you the relationships that you have to help you battle temptation. And there is great freedom and great hope as we lean into relationships, as we help one another, as we share our temptations, or as Christ said, share our burdens with one another. And so I pray that you can find some support and encouragement in your relationships, that you can deal with temptation in a healthy way. And next week, we'll talk about this huge issue of how do we address the underlying desire, need, or fear that's driving the temptation. In the meantime, Melissa and I are grateful for you. If you would like this video, go below and subscribe to this video channel, or maybe even send us a note. If you're getting our emails, you know there's some exciting things going on at HopeQuest, and we've got some more stuff coming in the next couple of weeks. One really, really, really big one that's really kind of a gift or opportunity that we want to give to you. But the bottom line is we're grateful for you. We're grateful for your prayers. Share this video with a friend and know that we will be grateful for you, and we will see you soon next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.